When I woke up that morning, the siren sounded. The siren itself wasn't the problem though. It was the number of blasts. Not one. To mark the beginning of the day's rigorous exercises, which every person was meant to be a part of, without exception. Not two. To mark the meals for each day, delivered to the buildings by automated robots at precise times with little packets of pills for each person. No other meals were allowed. Not even 3. To signal the day's end, when every room in every building had their lights cut off automatically. This time, it was 5. I couldn't believe my ears. There was only one possibility, I thought as I pushed the covers off in a full sprint towards the windows, and I felt my heart stop in surprise as I glimpsed the large, green and brown spotted vehicle in the middle of the street in front of my home. The siren sounded again. 5 shrieking blasts that shattered the quiet of the pre-dawn, and no doubt called the attention of every person in the town. I could feel my heart pump even faster, supplying me with the nervous energy as I pulled on the nearest items of clothing that I could reach. A simple white t-shirt and a pair of loose black pants, pulling my heavy brown curls into a ponytail. I rushed out of my room and into the living room, meeting the stares of my little family gathered around the coffee table as I slowed to a stop. My mother smiled, a little thing that raised the wrinkled corners of her lips, hope gleaming in her warm brown eyes, identical to mine, save for the ring of white starting to creep at the edges. My father stood by her, his broad shoulders straight and tense, and his pale blue eyes were shuttered, but I could sense that he was just as excited as she was, if not more. There were no words said, but I knew we couldn't be sure yet, not until the siren blasted for the 3rd time. Five more shrieking blasts that made me want to cover my ears and crouch until they passed. In the heavy silence that followed, there was a tiny click as the front door was unlocked. We stared at each other for the last time, a gleam of hope and wonder in my parents' eyes, before we walked to the door together. They held my hands, and I held theirs, suddenly nervous. The most I had seen of the outside was through the windows, but never anything more, and I didn't know what to expect. Mum noticed my hesitation and gave my hand a squeeze just as my father pulled the wooden door down and opened the door to the outside world. I couldn't believe how fresh the air was. It was unprocessed, unfiltered, lacking the telltale tang of chemicals that were used in air conditioning to immobilize the virus that plagued humankind, which led to the lockdown. My mother told me she was not even born when the lockdown started, when the X2 virus swept the world and took almost the entire population of more than 8 billion people with it. But her parents were already married then. It was horrible. So horrible that the gruesome deaths my parents both, and every person born in their generation, had seen to befall the first generation to be infected, still haunted them till date. My mother herself had been there the day my grandfather died, and she never spoke a word about it to anyone. The slightest mention of a virus-related death sending her into a silence that took her days to climb out of. I tried to shake off the thoughts of death as I observed the vehicle. A military van, judging by the build and synchronized movements of the 3 men who dismounted from the back and spread out in front of the only occupied houses in the street. The other survivors were out already, a family of 2 from a house I had always glimpsed from the study window, and a lone girl around my age from the house opposite mine. I couldn't help but shoot her a sympathetic smile. She was only 10 when her parents died, and I could still remember her cries as the people in white overalls and biohazard helmets took their bodies away. But she ignored me, flipping a blue-streaked lock of hair over her shoulder as she turned to the men who approached her. I turned to them too, wincing as they gestured to my parents and I to move into the idling van. And I knew that they were doing the same to others too, so I didn't protest, even when my limbs locked in place for no reason. I felt a chill wash over me, like a bucket full of ice water. I could hear a roar in my ears, stealing my ability to think and turning my head to cotton. I trembled, and my parents, who had walked a few steps away from me, turned back in worry.
Millie? What's wrong?
My mum's voice was layered in worry, and I knew she could sense my uneasiness. I glanced at the men behind them, already lifting the girl into the van, and felt a strange pulse behind my ear. I willed myself to breathe through the rising panic, to count the breaths as they came, and pull my leaden legs up with each breath I took, and soon I was right beside them. I looked up at my parents and smiled, but I knew it wasn't convincing enough. It felt more like a grimace than a smile, but I had to try. I couldn't give them a reason to worry, not when I finally had a name for what I felt, for the cold that took over my veins, not when I was afraid of being watched from one of the empty buildings at the end of the street by glowing beads of red. There were no windows in the van, and the doors were shut immediately the last person climbed in. So I was thankfully sheltered from whatever or whoever watched me from that window. I felt a phantom chill at the same point behind my ear and rubbed at it, feeling increasingly restless. Fear wasn't an emotion that I was familiar with, seeing as the only place I had ever known in the 15 years I had been alive was the interior of my little home that was once Telluride, a lively town with ski resorts in the mountain ranges behind it. It used to be a tourist hotspot, especially in the winter, but it was a ghost town now. As the van stopped, I felt a thrum of excitement and risked a glance at the boy who had been watching me all day. His eyes met mine, and when I blushed, I heard a snort from the girl. It was the first sound any of us, including the men in uniforms, had made since we got into the van less than 30 minutes ago, and it only served to increase the tension as the back doors opened. My mouth fell open, and I was sure the others felt the same surprise I did when they saw the sheer number of people that were arriving at a wide, empty space, and at the exact same time we did. I had never seen more than 3 people together in one place before that day, and I started to feel a bit lightheaded as I took in the crowd of wide eyes. We were herded out of the van, but the men refused to touch any of us, identical looks of repulsion on their faces. I could almost hear the condescension in their voices as they looked at the teeming crowd.
Why they let any of these animals out, I have no idea.
One of them spat, and I turned, ready to ask him what he meant by animals, when a deep voice boomed through the open space.
Welcome back, survivors!
All eyes turned to a huge makeshift stage where, surprisingly, a woman stood, with her arms wide and a sticky, unnatural smile on her face. Just looking at it made me sick to my stomach, but when I looked around, it seemed like everyone else was hooked.
113 years have passed since any of you, once afflicted by the virus that enslaved the entire world, had even stepped 1 foot or breathed the same air as the rest of humanity.
I wondered just how long she could keep it up, how long she could maintain the obviously fake smile she had plastered on her face. I had to admit to myself that she was strong enough to keep it till the very end of her long-winded speech. When I looked around, I saw that I wasn't the only one who felt bored. All the other kids of my generation looked like they were either ready to nod off in boredom, or in the case of the mysterious girl, ready to toss a shoe just to get her off of the stage.
From the results of the last weekly testing, it is my pleasure to announce to you all that the Earth is completely free of X2.
Everyone present, young and old alike, made so much noise in their happiness that I had to duck and cover my ears. I felt overstimulated. Like the roaring in my ears, courtesy of the crowd's cheering, drowned my final shreds of control. It didn't help that a tiny beam of red sliced through the air, just to rest on a boy's chest that was not even 5 feet away from me. As I raised my eyes to his, taking them away from the red dot on his chest, and to the similar one on mine as reflected through his eyes, I felt my pulse quicken. My breathing turned shallow. I noticed him gesturing for me to keep my cool as I stretched to my full height, but I just had to look around, and what I saw chilled my bones. Almost every member of the new generation, there was a red dot. I was in a permanent state of unease, and nothing that was going on helped me to calm down. All they could do was to hide it, but I could feel it in my bones, like a chill that would never stop until I faced reality. Something was coming. But seeing as the red dots disappeared after a few hours, I decided to just let myself enjoy the day. All the people were separated into groups based on their ages, not long after the speech, and I was finally alone for the first time in my life. My parents were herded off with the other adults to a rehab center to prepare them for a successful integration into the new society, and all the kids remained right where we were. The only instructions we were given before they left us was to have fun exploring the village, but to be back in our homes at dinner and in bed on schedule. Our parents would be home by then, or so they said. I chose to ignore the glaring signs and knowing the glances all adults gave to each other. The silence as they let go of their children, just to go with the flow of excited teenagers pairing up and going to explore the town. Soon enough, I was alone, and walking in the most random direction I could take. A chill ran down my spine. I could feel something was watching me. Something unseen. A presence that seemed to follow me as I walked through the deserted streets. I shivered and looked around, but I saw nothing. Every person was very far away, in the resorted parts of the city, but for some reason, I felt drawn to the deserted areas. The whole place just felt off, and with the echoes of people long gone, it was eerie. I kept walking, my eyes scanning the desolate buildings. I could almost feel the presence growing stronger, as if it was following me. I kept walking, trying to ignore the feeling, but I couldn't shake it. The further I went into the town, the more I felt like I was being watched. Finally, I came to an abandoned building and decided to take a break. I stepped inside and looked around, my heart still racing. I could feel a presence in the air, like an invisible force that was watching me, and it made the skin on the back of my neck tingle. I looked around, trying to see what or who watched in the shadows, but I saw nothing. I turned to the floor, to ceilings, to windows, then quickly wished I hadn't, because the red beams watching my every move since morning weren't eyes, they were people. I gasped, fighting the trembling in my legs, and tried to quietly find a way out. They were in front though. They would definitely be waiting behind too, so I had no way out. Afraid they would find me if I stayed in that one spot too long, I moved into the cold bowels of the building, backing away from that cursed window. I should have felt something was off. The whole situation was off. First, it was so dark in the rest of the building that I couldn't see past the tip of my nose. Second, when I mistakenly kicked a mysterious object, the clattering on the floors was too drawn out. And third, while I was at a fork in the long, dreary corridor, my spine tingled when a gust of fresh air rushed past. A thought made me pause, and I brushed it off, continuing this time in the direction the air came from. The air led me to an open door, and I froze as I walked through it, finally understanding why I thought the air smelled off. The door led back to the alley. My heart dropped in my chest. There was someone else in the building, and I was being herded. My palms turned clammy, eyes widening as I double-checked, trying to make sense of the situation. I had two options. I could either wait for whoever was chasing me from within the building, or I could take my look with the people on the other side of the building. I heard a scuffling beyond the entrance of the shadowed alleyway. It had to be the people who watched me. There was no other explanation. I would rather face whoever was inside. At least there would be a chance of survival. I snuck back into the dark building. I walked slowly, the blood roaring in my ears, my shoes squeaking against the cold concrete floor. The darkness beyond the door seemed to wrap around me like a cloak, and my heart raced with every step I took. It was so quiet that the sound of my heavy breaths seemed to echo, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I froze when a very tiny sound, like cloth on concrete, whispered behind me. I quickly ducked behind a corner, my heart pounding in my chest. I held my breath, my eyes straining to see through the darkness. Someone was following me. My body trembled. My eyes were drawn to the darkness of the corridor I had just stepped out of, and I could feel my heart beat in fear. The whisper of cloth on concrete increased with regular, light footsteps, and my heart stopped as a figure emerged from the darkness. I stifled my urge to scream, holding a sweaty palm to my mouth, when I saw the figure that was seemingly cloaked in darkness. The air shimmered, and I almost thought I heard a slight chuckle float through the air. I was frozen in place, unable to move a single muscle, but then a scent caught my attention in the still air. I thought in situations like this, I would smell blood, or something equally repulsive. But the wraith-like figure smelt of something out of my mother's closet. It smelled almost girly. My heart seemed to slow down very painfully when the figure stepped out of the grip of the shadows, and I was stunned to see a lock of blue hair in the sea of black waves. She stepped into the faint light from the boarded-up window right in the middle of the corridor, just before my hiding place. I huffed, rolling my shoulders to get rid of the tension that had set in, and walked up to her as confidently as I could, even with the tremble in my limbs. "You scared me."
That was the plan.
She winked, throwing her long black tresses over one of her shoulders as she walked towards me, her gait smooth and unhurried. That wasn't funny. I folded my arms once she was close enough for me to see the grey streaks in her brown pupils.
Oh, that was the fun part. What's not fun is letting those people catch you.
I snorted, rolling my eyes at her serious tone, and picked my way to the barred-up windows. Through the slits, I could see the streets beyond the building, and what I saw there made my veins turn to ice. There was a group of kids being herded into black vehicles, and for the first time since my own terror abated, I heard something similar. Screams. I stepped away from the window like the sight burned, and then turned to my silent companion. I knew she could hear them too. "What in the world is that?"
They're taking the marked.
Her voice was quiet, but still layered with a faint amusement that raked chilly fingers down my spine. "What do you mean by marked?" She walked even closer to me, quietly, until we were almost touching. But I stepped back, wrapping my arms around myself. The temperature had dropped drastically in just a few seconds.
I think you know the answer to that yourself.
My mind raced, and I swallowed. I had recognized one of the kids being taken away. It was the boy I had stared at, the one who lived in the same street that I did. He had gotten a red beam of light on his chest. And so had I. She watched the horror fill my face, taking every bit of colour being leached from my skin, and glowed with barely concealed glee. I decided there and then that I did not like her. The darkness of the woods surrounding the mountain ranges on the outskirts of town was near impenetrable. To me, who had never been outside of my small home, it seemed like a never-ending maze with no end in sight. I had been trudging after the girl, who never bothered to introduce herself after I had, for hours on end, and hadn't even felt the sting of exhaustion yet. This wasn't surprising in the least, considering the tale she had spun that was so unbelievable. It made perfect sense. The X2 virus started as a freak experiment, promising to provide everyone it had affected with quote-unquote superpowers. Superhuman strength, agility, the whole deal. It had worked, at first, but only at a great cost. The virus spread, and the vast majority of the world had to be locked down to ensure the safety of the people who caused the mess. Those who were never infected thrived in closed cities in different parts of the world, and provided for the rest of the world in hopes the virus would be stabilized. They were right. It worked. And most of those who had not been infected had forgotten the reason the virus was made in the first place. The elites, though, never forgot. They placed themselves in the highest levels of government, biding their time, waiting for the population to settle so they could raise an army to take over the rest of the world. I shuddered just thinking about it. When I asked the girl how she knew so much, she said she used to sneak out of her home a lot and stumbled on the truth. She looked sincere, and she knew of a way out of the woods to a community of kids escaping the elites deep in the mountains. I couldn't help but think of my parents, but I told myself I would go back for them. Soon, a boom and crash sounded from somewhere very close to where we creeped, and I stopped, feeling a chill wash over me. The girl turned to me, a glimmer of what I thought was fear in her eyes, and whispered for me to stay low while she investigated what caused the noise. I nodded, and crouched in the shadow of a large tree, listening to her footsteps as she left. My eyes darted at every sound, at the snap of leaves in the wind, and at the crisp sounds of leaves being stepped on. My throat went dry at the last sound. I couldn't call out, not when I didn't know her name. The darkness around me felt oppressive, pushing me even deeper into the trunk I hid behind, sapping my energy until I was a nervous, trembling ball. Just when I thought I had escaped the presence that sought me, the night fell silent around me. That was the first indication that something was wrong. The second, flames erupted with an ear-splitting bang in a semicircle around me, close enough to the back of the tree to singe my hair. My eyes darted, the fiery flames enclosing my vision. I was alone. There was no one here to help. I need a plan, I thought, breathing long, deep breaths seasoned with smoke as I scampered from the tree and into the clearing, trying to keep my heart pumping and my legs moving. The fight or flight response had never been as debilitating as it was in that moment, because it tried to hold me down in place and keep me from moving. My heart beat even faster, erasing the subconscious urge to stay, to wait to be saved, sending a blast of adrenaline to my limbs. I saw the wall of fire coming. I felt its heat as I increased my pace, every instinct I had screaming for me to stop. But I couldn't, not when ghostly figures in black tracked my every move from behind the wall of fire. I could feel the eyes on me, and I wasn't ready to go to them. I wasn't ready to become a monster. I ran to a tree and hauled myself up and past the fire using the brittle branches that fell apart in my hands. And when I landed on the other side, The heat from the flames was enough to burn the hair off of my skin, even as high as I was in the air, and I coughed as my chest tightened. From the smoke or from the panic, I couldn't tell. One thing I knew, though, was that I had to survive, or I would die trying, but only on my terms. So, I did the only thing I could. I ran, the wind nipping at my heels. I started with no destination in mind, but as I went on, ignoring the crashes in the forest behind me that told me my assailants were gaining on me, a blast of fresh air, untainted with smoke or heat, hit my nose, and I automatically turned, doubling my speed. I shook from the exertion, but I had to keep going. The sounds were getting even closer, and then I heard a howl tear through the chaos of the night. My bones turned to lead, but I kept moving. I couldn't stop. I wouldn't stop. If I did, that would be my end. I was being chased, and whoever or whatever was after me may have already gotten to the girl. The howling increased, drawing even closer. I could tell that it moved slowly, as though it fed on my terror. My legs moved as fast as they could, thorns and bushes draining blood as I moved past them. I jumped over a log in the path, muscles screaming with the effort, and kept moving, knowing that if I stopped, I would die. I stumbled on as the light coming through the trees changed to the blood-red light of sunrise. The howls faded into the distance, and I thought it was finally over. Still, I ran, and was jolted to a stop when a scream, female and begging for help, sounded from somewhere to the left of the path that I ran. It was long and drawn out, like the girl was being torn apart by a creature. I stood in place, debating. If I turned to help her, I would be caught. I felt guilty at the thought of leaving her to fate, seeing as she was the very reason I had the slightest idea of how to escape the fate they had in store for me. But I just wanted to leave. A creaking echoed, accompanied by a bright, hot red streak and the smell of burning pine, as a huge tree fell right in the middle of my path, barring my way. Disoriented, I tried going back the way I came, and discovered that the way back was barred by another burning tree too. Sweat dripped, mixing with the rising smoke and stinging my eyes. There were only 2 ways left to go. Left or right. My heart pumped faster as I ran to the left to help the girl. Streaks of smoke whizzed past my eyes. The forest was once again quiet, save for my breaths as I ran. I saw pale shadows in the trees around me. I knew I was being followed, but the thought didn't give me as much fear as what I imagined was happening to the girl. I had just run into another clearing when another boom echoed. I slid to a stop, narrowly escaping being squashed to death by the falling trees on either side of me, blocking my entrance and the way back. My heart dropped in my chest. She stood there, right in the middle of the clearing, unhurt. She called out to me, a strange expression on her face. I walked to her, a question forming on my lips, and then noticed the shadows surrounding her. I screamed in warning and raised my hands as I stepped towards her, but my heart stopped as I saw her smile to the closest shadow. No, not shadows. I realized as I watched her stalk towards him, with a beatific smile on her face. They were people, men and women, and they were all dressed in black, just as she was. She looked at me with a smug smile on her face.
I told you guys she wasn't that smart.
Her voice hit like a blow to the head. But I turned to run, only to be cornered by 2 snarling beasts. Mutated wolves, unlike any wolf I had ever seen in the movies at home. These ones were larger, stronger, faster, and from what I had experienced, even more sadistic. This was all adding up. Every irregularity in her story was adding up, and I almost cursed myself at how stupid I was. I couldn't run. Not anymore. I turned to her. "Why?" I asked, my voice quiet. "You're working with the very people who made us like this. Who made the world like this. Why?"
Why else?
My breath quickened in fear, but my voice stayed strong. I looked at her with my nose crinkled and arms crossed. "That virus is the reason your parents are dead," she hissed, and I felt tendrils of fear escape through my throat.
They are dead because they weren't strong enough. I am strong, and I will rule over the army to come in ways they have never seen before.
She snapped her fingers at the people around her.
Let's give her a head start, shall we? To see if she has what it takes.
They nodded to her, and as she turned towards me, her eyes gleaming, my heart sped up as I realized what that look meant. It wasn't fear. It was excitement. I didn't look back as I ran straight for the only opening left in the clearing, and a few seconds later I heard crashing in the forest behind me. It was futile. My attempt was futile, I could tell, but I had to try. One of the wolves attacked first, knocking me off balance and slamming me into the forest floor. The smell of death and rancid meat wafted from them, making my eyes water. My heart roared in my chest as I rained blow upon blow to any part of its body I could reach from my position on the ground. One of them reached for my throat with its sharpened claws, but I reached behind me for a round stone I had landed on and bashed it repeatedly into its skull. Disoriented by the smell of the red liquid now flowing from the gaping wound in the side of its head, I used all of my strength to push the stiff body off of me, running away as fast as I could before the other wolf could get to me. I ran even faster, stumbling into trees, all the while aware of the patter of feet following me, steadily catching up with me. But I could feel my strength flagging. I could feel my limbs slow. My eyes spun, heavy. I slowed to a stop. There was nothing more I could do. It was all over. When the girl walked towards my kneeling form, 3 minutes later, with a syringe in one hand, I made no sound. I was tired. So much for the day I gained my freedom. Hey sci-fi horror fans, it's Kira Rhodes. I'd like to take a moment to thank all of the amazing VAs that helped with the production of this video. You can find their links in the description. And thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to give it a thumbs up. Also, if you'd like to become an official member of our channel, you can do so by clicking on the join button. Membership starts at $5 only. And remember, stay cosmic.